First contact is such a rare and special thing. Often much effort is put into presenting the best possible picture of one species when meeting the next. Care and thought is put into each word and every movement to ensure peaceful talks. To say nothing of the style and image presented that will surely be recorded in pictures and later paintings to commemorate the event. This works best when each species has some idea that the other is near, and they prepare for this, fanning out to send diplomatic fleets to make sure the right people are in the right place, to bring trade, peace, prosperity, celebrations with joyous festivals, and more. But sometimes the wrong people are in the right place. Sometimes the best foot is not put forward. Sometimes those who step into the light and first greet their new neighbors are not diplomats. Sometimes they bear a grinning skull. Captain Devoros hated being out this close to the Calavian Nebula. The rumors and legends about the mist and the secrets it held always sent a shiver down his spine. Truth be told, he believed far more of those rumors and legends than he let on to the men. Too often had he seen things over his career that defied what any civilized man might think. The Germo could venture in with their trade fleets all they wanted. He wasn't going any closer to the nebula than he had to. But unfortunately for him, he had the great and distinguished honor of being the captain of Crown Prince Thuleme's ship. As befitting any flagship for a crown prince, the Nuvian Rose was the best the kingdom had to offer. A blend of firepower, armor, and luxury that wasn't matched in any other navy. Indeed, it was a good ship, with one small problem. When the Crown Prince was on board, it was he who gave the command. And in his desire to adventure, he wanted to see the nebula. So here they were. Deveros had managed to convince the prince to bring a small flotilla, but all that had been in port around Lorsen were smaller patrol craft. Good enough to scare off smugglers and the odd pirate, but he never liked going anywhere near the damn nebula without several heavy cruisers. Well, the prince gave the orders so it couldn't be helped. "Are you satisfied now?" the captain asked as he looked sidelong at the prince. A decent-looking lad, took after his mother more than his father in looks, but Deveros didn't know the king and queen well enough to say which personality he had. It's quite fascinating. "And you say dead ships and ghosts inhabit it?" "Aye, your royal highness." "Surely sailors don't buy into these stories?" he asked, smirking at the thought. Some do." Devoros didn't mention that he was one himself, but as you can see, it's really just a mist. Nothing to it, though it plays hell on the sensors. Now, if your curiosity is satisfied, perhaps I could turn the flotilla back to Lorsen? Why leave so soon, Captain? Nervous? The prince grinned, and Deveros was about to reply when Lieutenant Havens spoke. "Sir, 3 signatures are just coming into range." "Supply ships from Lorsen?" the captain asked, though he felt a chill even as he asked. "No, sir." From the nebula, sir!" Devoros leaned forward, gripping the railing on the bridge before him as he looked out into the cloud. Then he saw the vessels slowly emerge, the wisps of the nebula stretching out around them, as if they were fingers desperately trying to pull the ships back into the hellish mist where they came from. "So they don't match any known signatures in that middle ship. It's—" He trailed off as Devoros examined the hulk. He couldn't believe the size of the thing. He'd fought in many a battle, but never seen a vessel as large as that before. It was twice the size of the King's Might, which was the largest battleship they'd ever built. Not only that, but the ships looked dead. He could see scars and battle damage on all of them, but no lights or banners or anything to display their affiliation. "Open a hailing channel!" he ordered, then turned to his command chair and pressed the button for the comm. "Attention unknown vessels, this is Captain Deveros of the Nuvian Rose, flagship of the Crown Prince Thuleme, eldest son of King Thamin, ruler of the Desvian Kingdom. You are to identify yourselves immediately." He let go of the button and looked at Havens. "Sir, no response. I'm getting weapons readings, however." Deveros stabbed the button with his finger again. "Unknown vessel! Stand down immediately! We are backed by the full might of the Desvian Kingdom. Do you understand?" He let go and looked to Havens again. "Sir, I'm getting something." "It's very faint." "Play it," Deveros barked. He then frowned and strained to hear the noise coming through the speakers. Havens turned it up, and then Deveros's blood ran cold as the sound filled the bridge and echoed all around him. It was laughter. Not a joyful, happy sound, but a deep rasping and sinister laugh. "Shields!" he yelled just as the central vessel fired. He watched a plasma bolt larger than any he'd ever seen arc out and slam into the light destroyer Jove's Blessing. The ship buckled and ruptured from the single shot, and he gasped as he watched 50 men turn into a fireball. "General quarters! Sound the alarm! Now! Shields up! Weapons firing!" As he yelled, the crew dashed to their stations, and he saw the vessels start to stream forward, finally pulling away from the last misty fingers of the nebula. "Some more readings. They're launching small vessels." "They're what?" he exclaimed, never having heard of ships carrying their own light craft. "Fighters? Bombers? What are they?" I don't know, Sue." The rows began to shift, trying to bring their broadside to bear while he saw the Jester's flak cannons begin to spew out shots at the oncoming craft. He expected them to split apart and try to avoid the fire, but they came straight through it, the first few quickly exploding under the fire. That didn't stop the rest, however. As they kept coming, they were only making minor adjustments. When he saw them slam into the side of the Jester and then the Trident, he realized what they were. Boarding vessels. Who uses boarding vessels? Alert the Marines! Deveros only just realized the prince was still with him. Your Highness, please get to the command bunker in the middle of the ship. The boy was just staring out at the battle that was unfolding, frozen in place by wonder. Heavens curse ye, he muttered. Helmsman, get the rows out of here! Full power to the engines. We're running? The prince asked, startled into saying his first words since the ships appeared. Aye, we're running. Having the helm is yours! He barked at the lieutenant before standing and gripping the prince by his arm. As he stepped off the bridge, the royal guard were already falling into place around him. He nodded to the marine captain. We need to get him to the yacht. It should outrun the attackers. But why are we running? The prince demanded. The kingdom does not run. The royal family are not cowards. Boy, that damn ship destroyed a light destroyer in a single shot. It's bigger than anything I've ever seen, and it came out of the cursed nebula. Our job now is to get you out of here safe. He began to pick up the pace to a light jog as the royal guard kept moving around him and the prince. Deveros could hear the clinking of his medals and commendations. He hadn't been planning for a damn battle. The ship suddenly rocked and he stumbled, but managed to catch himself from falling over. The prince wasn't so lucky, and the captain had to help him up. The engines are hit. We need fire teams to the engineering bay, Haven's panicked voice said over the ship's comm. Then there were more jolts, but far less intense. Boarders! A stand by all hands to repel boarders. Come on, lads, Devoros urged and ran on, now ignoring his shortness of breath as best he could while heading to the ship's private hangar. However, just as they reached the corridor, they heard an explosion and screaming. The hangar was full of the boarding vessels he'd seen before. There were swarms of the unknown assailants charging the Marines. The bastards had swords. Swords! He could see the blades dripping with crimson blood. They didn't take cover from the energy bolts flying towards them. They just charged ahead straight into the Marines. For every one a Marine seemed to take down, two more would leap forward, ready to drive their blades into his men. The hangar is lost. The escape pods! He urged then and pulled on the prince's arm. The group turned, now running towards the spine of the ship as he could hear more explosions and screams echoing through the halls. As they reached the nearest station, he could see bodies strewn about, but a few were trying to pry open the door on an escape pod. He wasn't sure why at first, until he saw the sailor inside desperately pounding on the glass. There was a fire in the pod, and he couldn't get out. What happened? The captain asked as the sailors turned. Sah! Some of the prince's guests tried to escape in the pods. They just blew them up. None got out. The controls are locked up now. Devoros cursed and turned. He couldn't spare any time for the burning sailor trapped in the pod. To the bunker. A distress call must be out by now. Maybe the bunker will hold long enough. Go. The royal guard were more inclined to run now, and Devoros, though in good shape for his age, was panting heavily as he tried to keep up. The guard just made it into the junction before the bunker when he heard the yell. It was something downright feral and terrifying as it echoed through the halls as the attackers charged down at the guard. Knowing their duty, the guard dropped to their knees, rifles up as they started to fire down the halls to try and hold off the outright insane boarders. Deveros grabbed the prince, dragging him down the only safe hall towards the bunker. He could see the massive vault-like door open before him, and the safe room within. He needed to get the prince in there and seal it. Behind him he heard the cries of anguish as the guard began to fall one by one, overwhelmed by the attackers. The guard captain sprinted past him, picking up the prince and bodily carrying him before tossing him into the room. As he began to push the door shut, Deveros desperately punched in the code to lock the door. There was no time to get himself inside. The door finally shut and he could hear the heavy thunk of the locks sliding into place and let out a sigh of relief for but a moment. Then he heard the yell again and looked down the hall. The last of the guard was on the ground, throat opened by the blade of an attack. Only he and the guard captain were left. Deveros pulled his pistol, firing down at the attackers. He both saw and heard metal slugs get fired down towards him, echoing around the chamber. Who in the hell still used slug throwers? The guard captain pulled a temporal wall charge from his belt, slamming it into the ground. An ethereal green wall rose up to fill the hall and the bullets slammed into it, stopped by the field. The attackers pressed on, but as the first of their number pushed through it, they were slowed down, which made it easy for Deveros and the other captain to shoot them the moment they were through. He could see the figures testing the wall then. Their charge stopped. Finally, given a moment of reprieve, Deveros studied their forms. They were unlike any species he knew, but he remembered the last time he had a Germo captain on board as a guest. He'd heard stories. A new species that didn't just hide in the nebula or travel through it, but actually lived in the cursed thing. A species both barbaric and sophisticated at the same time, judging from the size of that ship. Yet the weapons they used, he wagered this was they. What did they call themselves again? That's right, humans. He watched 3 of their number surge forward into the wall together. Deveros and the guard captain fired on them as they pushed through, easily killing them the moment they were on the other side of the barrier. But once they were on the ground, Deveros saw one of them open his hand, a red and white sphere dropping to the deck. "Look out!" he called, but it was too late as the explosion knocked him back and he blacked out. When Deveros came to, there was a splitting pain in his head, and his chest, and his face. He truly hurt everywhere. His eyes slowly opened, and he realized he was on his knees. His head rolled a little as he tried to move, but something pushed him back down. His hands were stuck behind him as well. As consciousness finally took hold, he realized he had been taken prisoner, hands tied behind his back, held on his knees by one of the humans. A splinter of metal was lodged in his chest, and he could feel the blood dripping out, and his lips felt blistered and cut. Just before him was the guard captain in a similar situation. What were the humans waiting for? Then he heard the footsteps echoing out down the hall. They were well-paced, methodical, threatening, a very steady clack, clack, clack. Then he saw the figure. It had long crimson-red hair and was wearing a battered and dented suit of some sort of strange metal armor. If they were anything like his people, then he figured by the curves it must be a female. She was grinning as she clutched a long cutlass in one hand, blood dripping from the tip, and there seemed to be an ominous black smoke following behind her, as if she were one of Grimm's angels sent from the black caverns to drag him to that particular hell. She stood before them then, seeming to tower high above them, impossibly tall it felt like. She looked between Deveros and the guard before pointing the tip of her sword at the guard. "What's the code to the vault?" "Vault?" Did she mistake the bunker for a safe holding jewelry? Either way, the guard just spat a mouthful of blood up onto the torso of her armor. Deveros gulped as he watched the figure reach up with her other hand and slowly wipe some of the blood onto 2 of her fingers. Then, to his absolute horror, she pulled the fingers up to her lips and delicately licked them clean with her tongue. Tastes rather nice. Sort of a kick to it. As she looked at her fingers and seemed to muse the very taste of the guard's blood, she drove her sword forward with the other hand, driving into his throat. Deveros turned away as he heard the guard gurgle out and then collapse in a growing puddle of his own blood. Devoros hadn't felt fear in a long time, but he felt it now. Was this really a species of actual living creatures, or was she really one of Grimm's angels sent to drag him down in the abyss? The code? It took him a moment to breathe and build his courage before pulling himself up and looking her in the eye. I'll never talk. He expected the end to be swift, but to his despair he instead saw a gleam in her eyes, a gleam that nearly made him piss himself in fear as he felt that chill straight down his spine. Tisk tisk. Never is such a long time. Instead of the blade, her fist came down and everything went black. When the nearest fleet responded to the distress call, they found the remains of the flotilla empty and devoid of life. Weapons and parts had been stripped from the shattered husks that were once ships. Nothing alive was found on board, just bloodstains and bodies. The central bunker on the Rose had been ripped free of the heart of the ship. But the only clue they had to work with was the image that had been left behind. Painted on the hull of the ship with the blood of the slain, it was a grinning skull sitting atop two crossed swords. The fleet of the damned had pulled back into the nebula after their engagement with the Desvian fleet. It seemed to have been fate that when they finally reached the edge of the nebula, they had run straight into a fleet rich for the taking. There had been no thoughts of diplomacy when they heard the announcement the flagship belonged to a crown prince. And now they had salvaged more weapons in a single haul than they'd managed in years. Junko had been assigning who got what new weapons while simultaneously organizing the prisoners who had been brought back. But now the prisoners were all assembled and ready, so she had to prep them before her boss came to talk to them. Junko stood on the balcony of the flight control tower, looking down into the main hangar of the Retribution, examining the massed prisoners being guarded below. Just half of the crew of the Rose had been taken prisoner, as the rest had been killed in the fighting. Junko had been somewhat surprised by the high casualty rate the Xenos suffered, and intended to find out if it had been driven by their refusal to surrender or simply confusion with how to do that. This hadn't been the Retribution's first contact with another species, but it was far and away the bloodiest. It was likely the shortage of translators didn't help either. Either way, her findings would have to wait. She brushed a hand through her short black hair in an attempt to make it look a bit neater, and looked down at her sharply pressed gray and blue business suit before tugging the hem of her skirt to make sure it was neat and even. Then she took a deep breath and walked forward further out onto the balcony where she tapped on the mic. At the tapping sound, the 20,000 or so prisoners began to look up, and she could hear their muttering die away until she had silence. "Crew of the Rose!" She saw a light in the corner of her eye as the translator activated, and she tried again. "Crew of the Rose, my name is Junko Takano. You are prisoners aboard the Retribution, and I'm sure many of you are worried and concerned for what will come next. That will be addressed shortly. I am here to introduce Baroness Andromeda Suvikov, commander of this ship and the entire fleet of the damned." Junko nodded then, and stepped back, watching her boss stride forward. Andromeda had a big grin her face as she approached the edge of the balcony, and the cameras broadcast her face onto the massive screens spread throughout the hangar and the rest of the ship. Her black, crimson, and gold power armor made her into a very imposing figure, especially since she had those miniature smoke generators built into the back that ensured a steady, ominous stream of black smoke. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the prisoners get a good look at her menacing grin, before finally speaking in their language with the help of her own translator. "Listen up, because this will be the last time any of you hear me speaking to you in your own language. There's something you need to understand. Your king won't spend a single ingot for your lives, your navy won't come rescue you, and they're likely telling your families that you're already dead. You are completely worthless to me as prisoners. So I'm going to give you two choices. On the one hand, you can keep being worthless slaves to a king that doesn't give a shit about you, and a navy that would rather kill you than fight for you, and ask to be dropped off on the next planet we find." She paused then, looking around the crowd of prisoners. Junko was always impressed with how well this sort of speech worked when they captured large groups of prisoners, especially Xenos. They'd just been ruthlessly attacked, and likely seen many friends and kin die. She never figured it would work. Yet she'd seen it work before, and was curious to see if it would work again. It really sounded like an awful way to phrase things to her, but she was a secretary and not a military commander of any sort. Before her own capture, she never ever would have guessed this was how her life would turn out after getting perfect scores back in the academy. But 3 years into her employment with the galaxy's most notorious and ruthless pirate, she found herself to actually getting comfortable. Finally, the Baroness starting talking again. Or you can start giving a shit about your lives and do something meaningful for yourselves. I'm a pirate. This ship is crewed by pirates. This fleet is built of pirates. Do you know what we do? Some of you might think we steal and kill, which is true. But more importantly, we fight for freedom. In a galaxy where every pissant with power tries to rule your life and turn you into slaves to law, wage, or culture, we fight against it. From what I know of your own culture, you're all enlisted because you were born to the wrong parents. Well, pirates don't believe in classes. If you fight with me, sail with me, and serve with me, then you'll get the same chance as everyone else in my fleet to get promoted. You spend decades fighting, dying, and slaving away with no hope of promotion, believing a tiny pension at the end is worth it. That's madness! You know what we believe in? We believe in meritocracy, not aristocracy. Junko wasn't really sure about that line considering Andromeda was a baroness. Even so, she knew her boss had a certain charisma to her. The way she'd move when she spoke and emphasize her words with various gestures had a certain power to it. It was effective with the common sailor. She'd seen her convince many human crews to give up their old allegiances and join the damned. But this time she wasn't focused on her boss. She was watching the prisoners. It was impossible to read any facial expressions from up here, but she noted the general body language. She could see some of them start whispering to one another as Andromeda went on. Your officers have told me of the great riches they obtain every time you go to battle. They enjoy the spoils of war, titles of authority, land, and riches. What do you get? A pat on the back? A little ribbon to commemorate the event? Well, pirates all get a share of the bounty. We captured a few hundred rich brats belonging to your kingdom's wealthiest families, and they're going to pay dearly for their children's safe return. Everyone in my fleet will be getting a share of that. Junko knew for a fact Andromeda hadn't spoken to any of the prisoners except for the captain of the Rose, but by the way the sailors murmured, it must have sounded accurate. There was a slight pause as Andromeda paced back and forth before she continued. That can include you. I'm inviting every single one of you to join my crew. I won't lie, there will be challenges. You'll have to learn our language and fast. You won't be safe because we're always in the thick of battle. And you'll be taking orders from officers of other species. But that's only until some of your own become officers themselves. And you know what? You can leave at any port we dock at. You won't be bound by some 30-fucking-year contract like your Navy forces on you. Sail with us for a year. Make yourself enough money to buy a home for you and yours, then leave. Any of my crew at free to go any time. Junko glanced at her boss for a moment now. She always got that special fire in her eyes when she mentioned this next part. But most of them have been with me for over 10 years. Want to know why they've been with me so long? Besides the riches they've gained, they believe in freedom. One day, this fleet will find a rock good enough to call home, and then we'll be starting a nation truly dedicated to freedom. No kings, no nobles, no aristocratic bastard getting rich off of your blood and sweat! Junko watched the prisoners shift and nod. She couldn't be totally sure of the Xeno's body language, but she got the idea they were buying into the speech. So what are you going to do? Go back to your life as a ship's slave? Or are you going to free yourself? Break your back for a pittance? Or fight with us for your share of the riches? How many of you are ready to fight? How many of you are ready to experience freedom? Are you with me? She bellowed out. Her face shone cleared on the massive screens as many of the Xenos began to cheer. If you're with me, then you need to make more noise than that. I said, are you with me? There was louder cheering as she grinned. Well, good. Those who aren't man enough to take control of your life, tell your guard you'd rather be dropped off on the next rock and pray your navy doesn't execute you for surrendering. But the rest of you? The rest of you will be following me to riches and freedom. She cheered out at that, raising her cutlass as the Xenos cheered below. By Junko's observation, about 3/4 of the prisoners were shouting, cheering, and pushing towards the front of the group, while the other fourth remained at the back, considerably less enthused. She typed a quick command into her tablet and watched the guards move at the back to separate those who weren't cheering from the rest. Soon, the 15,000 or so new recruits would get processed. Some would be added to the gunners, some to the maintenance and tech staff, but most would likely find themselves in the boarding parties. She wasn't sure how useful the Desvians would be in battle, but she'd soon find out. Either way, they needed all the bodies they could get. This wouldn't be the first time they'd mass conscripted Xenos into their crew either. It would take time to get through the language barrier, but she had faith in the rest of the crew to bring them up to speed, or perhaps launch them out the nearest airlock. Shaking her head slightly as if to clear the thoughts bouncing around her skull, she followed as Andromeda walked off of the balcony and into the hangar control room connected to it. An excellent speech as always, sir. I estimate 15,000 converts. Since we only lost 2,000 in the attack, this quite the net gain. Andromeda cast a sidelong look at Junko, who quickly added a final, "Sir." Once she was satisfied with Junko, Andromeda stopped in the hangar's control room so that Junko could reach up and turn off the smoke dispensers on the back of her armor. Arrayed around the rest of the control room was Andromeda's lifeguard. 7 of the most dedicated men and women in the fleet of the damned, plus a single Xeno named Crag. At least that's what everyone called him. He was some sort of rock species and had been with the fleet long before Junko had arrived. Junko had tried to find out more about him, but everyone who'd speak about it didn't know, and those who knew wouldn't speak about it. One thing was for certain. Every one of them would sacrifice their own children before letting harm come to Andromeda. How the pirate was able to create such fanatic devotion to her and her cause still seemed mysterious to Junko. Hers was a life of reason and logic for the most part, so to see other people be so completely controlled by emotion and rhetoric was confusing to her. But she couldn't deny how effective it was. Finally, she saw drawn out of her own mind yet again when her boss started talking. They were especially ready to follow. You heard what the turtles had to say about them. Being conscripted at a young age and forced into service in their navy and army for the next few decades of their life just makes my job easier. Now then, Junko, have the prisoners who didn't accept my offer get diverted into cargo room 172. Junko arched her brow at that, since Andromeda had never asked her to do something like that before. But she quickly typed out the commands. Something Junko had learned early was to never question a direct order until after it was done. Is the Desvian captain in the observation room like I ordered? Junko quickly looked at her tablet, sifting through pages of data. Yes, sir. It seems Cookie is almost done tending to him as well, sir. Junko now had a terrible suspicion as to why the prisoners were being funneled into an outer cargo bay connected to that particular observation deck. She had originally wondered why the prisoner wasn't taken to the med bay if Andromeda thought he was so valuable. Well then, let's find out what's in that vault, Andromeda said with a grin before she started walking. Since her and her lifeguard had power armor, they had long, quick strides that necessitated Junko hurriedly jogging alongside to keep up. This was why she always wore flats. When she'd first found out Andromeda had ordered a special suit of power armor with heels, she'd thought the pirate was insane. But then she'd seen how imposing a figure she made walking down a hallway as it filled with black smoke. As much as Junko thought it was crazy, Andromeda understood how people worked better than most psychologists or sociologists. The fact that she could quickly adapt her speeches or tactics against various Xenos just made it all the more impressive. Junko constantly had to remind herself that just because her boss was psychotic, dangerous, and violent as hell, didn't mean she was stupid. If anything, her intelligence might only be intensified by her being insane. She had no one to talk about this idea with, however, as any mention of Andromeda being crazy to one of the crew would likely get Junko a quick execution. As the others walked through the massive halls of the ship, and she jogged to keep up, she wondered how important she really was to the pirate. Junko didn't inspire people. She couldn't fight to save her life. All she did was organize. But she might be the only person in the fleet capable of such a task. Andromeda often told Junko how much she valued her. It still seemed strange to her. So, feeling especially curious and courageous, Junko spoke up, but at the last minute chickened out. It's always impressive how many converts you get with those speeches, sir. But I'm still shocked with how effective they are. The idea of fighting for the people who had just taken me prisoner seems absurd. Sir. That's because you're a completely different sort of person, Junko, To the common sailor, I'm offering more money than they could ever make legally, and a good chance at freedom in the end. Plus, they can leave at any port. It's a better deal than most navies give them, and you think differently. You remember our first meeting, don't you? Ah, of course it was hard to forget, sir. You decapitated my former employer. That fat piece of shit totally deserved it. Andromeda interrupted. Junko had only been serving as the provincial governor's secretary for a week when the ship had been raided, so she couldn't say for sure how much he deserved getting his head cut off. But he hadn't been a very nice person. Andromeda, of all people, had treated her much better over the years, mostly. And then you asked if I was a good secretary because you desperately needed one. When I admitted to having perfect scores in the academy and being hired to serve as personal assistant to the governor, you then gave me two options: work for you or get tossed out the nearest airlock. Sir, this was why Junko always felt a little slighted. Common sailors who murdered and pillaged could leave at any time, but she who had done nothing wrong was stuck. Because I need you more than you need freedom. Andromeda said very matter-of-factly, which caused Junko to arch a brow in surprise. You would have worked for him for a few years, started to move your way up, meet someone nice, think of settling down. I can see it all. The pirate tapped the side of her head. You would have led a very boring and safe life. But now? Now you get all this excitement, more money than you could ever need, and the chance to just get more and more power. As I carve out a pirate empire, I'll need my own governors, you know. Junko blinked at that idea. Her as a planetary governor? For pirates. Thank you, sir. She muttered, unsure how else to proceed. Don't worry about it, Junko. You're on the list of top 10 most critical people in this fleet. A position you've earned. Andromeda gave Junko a pat on the shoulder, which knocked her forward and sent her tumbling to the ground as she cried out in surprise and pain. Ah, fuck, I always forget you're not in power armor, Andromeda said before reaching down and swiftly hauling Junko back to her feet. Junko grimaced and fixed her glasses on her face before groaning and rubbing her shoulder. Common mistakes, sir. Could happen to anyone. Junko quickly covered for her boss as she took a moment to straighten out her clothes. She could see the lifeguards smirking around her. The bastards always seemed amused when that happened. Then she groaned a bit louder as her shoulder throbbed. She tried to rotate it to loosen it up, but it simply hurt. I'll make sure Cookie gives you some nice drugs, Andromeda promised, before looking up at the nameplate over the door they'd just happened to stop next to. But we're here, so get it together, Junko. Yes, sir, she said quickly, smoothing out her skirt suit and adjusting her stance for a moment before taking a breath. Better, sir? Much, the pirate said with a nod and then stepped forward into the observation room for Cargo Bay 172. Inside, Cookie was tending to the Desvian captain who was sitting on the edge of a gurney while a number of pirates in combat harnesses were arranged around the rest of the room. This was the closest up Junko was able to actually see one of the Desvians. They were the most human of the Xenos they'd encountered so far. 2 arms, 2 legs, and they walked upright. Most of the sailors she had seen were a bit shorter and stockier than most of the pirate crew, but not far off in size. The captain was taller, though, and while not quite as broad, he was fairly wide in the shoulders. Their features made Junko think of a cat, but they had very large, triangular furred ears. The captain had reddish fur along his face with black markings along his muzzle and forehead, but strangely he also had distinctly different grayish-black hair on his head. His eyes were a deep brown that made her think of dark chocolate. Most curious to her was that, unlike the short tails of the crew, the captain sported a bushy striped red and black tail that made her think of a raccoon. It was clear the captain was older, but he still seemed in good shape as she noticed the toned and trim figure evident through his uniform. Most of the medals had been torn off in the fighting, but he still had a few dangling from his chest. I like his face, Andromeda said suddenly, making Junko look up at her boss. The other pirates in the room seemed a bit surprised by her comment as well. You removed his translator, right? She then asked Cookie. The big, somewhat chubby man who was both Andromeda's personal chef and surgeon looked over and nodded. Sure is. I got him all patched up too. I did what I could with the pain meds to keep him coherent, but also keep him from hurting too much. Junko, you need something too? He asked as he obviously noticed the girl shifting her shoulder. He was always very nice to her and she liked him a great deal. Yes, please, she said quietly as Andromeda stepped forward, inspecting the Xeno as he sat on the edge of the gurney he'd originally been brought in on. He was obviously nervous with how closely the pirate was examining him. "Why don't I understand?" he asked then, looking around the room with worry on his face. "They removed your translator," Junko said, activating her own so she could be understood. The Xeno's eyes went wide as he reached back and felt along the base of his neck and head to find the bandage in place. Cookie quickly pulled the Xeno's hands away from the spot. "Ah, don't mess with it or you'll tear the stitches. I'll get you into the med bay soon to do a better job of it, and you'll be good as new." The Xeno didn't look comforted by this idea, and Andromeda was still directly in front of him, examining him closely. Finally, Andromeda looked back at Junko, speaking without her translator. "Junko, come here and touch his face. Tell me how it feels." Junko blinked at the strange request, but she walked forward, reaching up as she gently stroked her fingers and palm along the side of his muzzle. This made him jerk back a bit until Raun, one of Andromeda's lifeguard, stepped forward and held his head in place. As Junko stroked the Xeno's face once more, she couldn't believe how soft the fur felt. "It's incredibly soft, sir. Very smooth and silky to the touch." Andromeda seemed to consider this and then tilted her head a bit. Raun shoved the captain off the side of the gurney then, making the Xeno drop down to his feet and stagger for a moment. Junko couldn't figure out what was going on and blinked in confusion as Lacey and Fritz stepped forward, shoving the captain down onto his knees before the pirate. Then Junko squeaked out in surprise herself when Andromeda squeezed her shoulders and positioned her directly in front of the Xeno. "I don't know why they're doing this," Junko told him in his language through the translator before she realized that her boss and the two guards seeming to be lining up the height of his face while kneeling with her. "Oh, let's see. You're in flats, so if I was in heels, his face would be right about—" "He's like the perfect height," Andromeda finally said. "I like his face. He's got soft fur and that muzzle looks interesting. No matter what, don't fuck up his face," she very pointedly told the assembled pirates before letting go of Junko and walking over to the massive observation window overlooking the cargo bay below. "What were they doing?" the Xeno asked Junko, very confused still since he didn't know Andromeda in that way Junko did. Just measuring your size for later," Junko hesitantly said, trying to avoid the question while giving him some sort of answer. But the Xeno just frowned in confusion. Then Andromeda waved her over and Junko quickly scurried over to her boss while the power-armored pirates dragged the Xeno over to the window. Down below, the 5,000 or so prisoners who didn't intend on fighting with the pirates and joining the crew were being assembled in the cargo bay. Normally, Junko would have them moved to a bay where cots, aid stations, and eating areas had been set up. But she hadn't expected Andromeda to divert them here. "That was an interesting vault you were guarding with your personal guard, Captain," Andromeda said, finally using her translator so he could understand her. "Care to save us all some time and tell me what's in it?" The Xeno was quiet as Andromeda turned to look down at him. Now, I already told you that forever is such a very long time. Especially now that you're on my ship. We have all manner of method to make your time here unpleasant." Junko always felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end when her boss began to talk like this. She'd seen what could happen. As nice as Cookie was to her and the crew, he didn't seem to have any trouble taking the scalpel to prisoners. "You think I'm afraid of torture?" the Xeno asked, seeming more resolved. But to Junko's surprise, Andromeda just laughed. "Someone like you? No, I don't think you are. I'm fairly sure men like you wait for moments like this all their life. You're probably sporting a hard-on right now just thinking about being able to sacrifice yourself for some stupid vault." The Xeno leaned back, shocked by what the pirate was saying. "You relish the thought. All that pain and suffering for information you've got. Makes you feel important." She kept laughing for a moment before letting out a soft sigh and shaking her head. "I just wanted to get your hopes up. I have no intention of torturing you." The Xeno was clearly confused now. "Then, what?" He trailed off, too unsure to continue. "See those sailors down there? Those are the living crew members who don't want to serve in my fleet. The other, what was it, Junko, 15,000? She asked, looking back for a moment. "Yes, sir," Junko said with a nod. The other 15,000 are happily being processed so they can join my crew. What? The Xeno gasped. 15,000? There can't possibly be that many. He was obviously shocked, mouth hanging open a bit at the news. Yes, I'm actually curious about this myself, Junko cut in. We've never had this many converts after such a bloody battle, and it's especially odd considering we've never encountered your species before. I was wondering what socio-economic or class-based structure you have that would lead to this. Junko! Andromeda interrupted, staring at her assistant. Shut the fuck up! Yes, sir, Junko quietly said and looked down. Her boss paused for a moment before speaking again. Before I was so strangely interrupted by my secretary, Junko looked up from her feet to see her boss glaring at her and quickly looked back down. What I was going to ask you is if you're the sort of man who gets called when the chips are down. The Xeno blinked in confusion. When fragments are down? Andromeda let out an annoyed groan. The translator program wasn't perfect, and they needed more exposure to the Desvians for it to get better, so mistakes like this would happen for a while. Are you dependable? The sort of guy who always stands up to the plate. I used to be that sort of person myself. No matter how dire the situation, I would always stand up to the plate. She paused then, and Junko looked up, seeing Andromeda looking off at nothing for a moment. Until one day I had to smash the plate and jam one of the shards into someone's throat, the pirate said rather darkly. But Junko tried to correct her mistake and spoke up. Sir, the plate referred to in that idiom is a baseball plate, not a dinner plate. You're mixing your... Junko stopped as she saw the glare her boss was directing her way. Junko, I've still got shards of that plate around, you know. Want me to jam one into your pretty little throat, too? Junko gulped heavily then and shook her head. No, sir! Then do you want to shut the fuck up like I told you until I need you again? Junko nodded quickly, not even saying anything before Andromeda replied. Good. And then focused on the Xeno. Where was I? Right. Are you the kind of person who takes responsibility? Are you the sort of captain who looks out for his men? Extra grog rations or whatever you call your version of alcohol. Perhaps less strict about certain rules than some of your fellow officers. Because you're the captain of a royal prince's ship, right? That would imply you're trustworthy. But you also didn't order your men to die to the last man while protecting the ship. I was expecting a bit more fanatical devotion from a ship like yours. So I'm thinking you like your men. The common sailors. Andromeda stopped then and slowly waved her arm at the window. All those men, for example. I've promised to drop them off on the next settled planet we find so they can go back to their families, or just back into your navy. They can keep living even though they turned me down. But I lied a little. It's not just up to them or me, but it's also up to you. She pointed down at the Xeno when she said that. Me? He finally asked, giving a worried look out the window at the cargo bay and the sailors being herded inside. Yes, you, Andromeda said with a wicked grin. Junko then realized why she'd picked this cargo bay specifically. This is an exterior cargo bay. That wall over there, that opens up to the outside. Now, those sailors down there won't know it, but at any moment I could give the order, and they'll be very quickly sucked out into the void where they'll gasp for air for a moment, and then have their eyes explode out of their skulls. Andromeda made a gesture with her hands to emphasize her words as the Xeno cringed and squirmed on his knees. In general, they'll all die in a quick yet horribly violent manner, and that all depends on you. She poked the Xeno in the chest, easily pushing him back thanks to the power armor. I can't give you the code, he whispered, seeming a bit more unsure and certainly less confident than he had been when speaking about being tortured. Who the fuck said I wanted the code? I just want to know what's in the damn thing. And to be fair, I win no matter what. You tell me to go fuck myself. I kill 5,000 sailors, and then I know that it's worth more than all their lives put together. That you would rather sacrifice all those hard-working men instead of telling me what's inside. Which means what's inside is insanely valuable. Or you tell me what I want to know, they all live, and I get what I want still. But I'm sure you're thinking I'm not like that. I'm also a captain and I couldn't possibly be that cruel to sailors. Well, that's fair because you don't know me. Junko. Captain, this is Baroness Andromeda Suvikov. commander of the Retribution and the entire fleet of the damned. She was never sure why her boss liked being introduced by someone else. Ah, what's your name, Captain? The Xeno blinked in confusion, looking over at Junko. Cassius Henry Deveros. Baroness Andromeda Suvakov, this is Captain Cassius Henry Deveros. Andromeda reached down, extending her hand to the Xeno. With a confused and worried look, the Xeno glanced from the guards behind him up to Andromeda, and then reached up with both his hands. But Andromeda just grabbed his right and shook it. A pleasure to meet you, Captain Deveros. Likewise? Captain Suvakov? He was clearly lost as to what was going on, but then Andromeda tugged him up to his feet, making him gasp as she essentially pulled him up by his arm alone. Once he was up, he gave his shoulder a rub, and Andromeda nodded at Junko. Well, call them in, she said, but Junko just blinked in confusion. Call? Who in? The other prisoners, of course, she growled, making Junko increasingly worried. I don't know what other prisoners! You didn't say anything to me about other prisoners. Andromeda's face switched from one of anger and annoyance to one of realization. Oh, that's right. You were busy. Slipped my mind. Who did I tell about that? She looked around the room before Titus, commander of her lifeguard, nodded. I took care of it, sir. The door opened then as more pirates began to usher in a number of Desvian prisoners. They were taller and skinnier than the crew or the captain, and were wearing much nicer clothes. Junko got the idea pretty quickly that they must be the aristocrats on the ship. They didn't look like they were military based on their impractical clothes and abundance of jewelry. Their arms had been tied behind their backs, and as they were ushered in, Junko got a better idea of their species' variation in fur coloring and tail types, something she found fascinating. The prisoners were lined up and then forced down to their knees across from the Xeno captain. Junko quickly counted 21 of them. Andromeda walked up to the first one in line, who had a sort of brownish-black coat. What's your name? I'm Juravan Seelin Ostok, Lord of Aridin. My father is Earl of Aridin. Yeah, that's nice, Andromeda said and pulled her sidearm free, leveling it with the Xeno's surprised face. Wait! The Xeno captain shouted before she pulled the trigger. You don't need to do that. I get it. You mean every bit of what you say. Lacey and Fritz held the Xeno's arms, ensuring he wasn't going anywhere, but he still pulled against their grip, held fast by the power armor. It's not necessary to demonstrate. Andromeda lowered her sidearm then as the aristocratic Xeno fainted, flopping over onto his side. Good. Because if I'm wrong about you liking your common sailors, then that means you should still care about the rich kids who are on your ship. Some of them are probably important. I could walk down this line blowing the back of their heads off without concern, all before jettisoning your crew like trash. And that would tell me all I need to know about that safe. Not one of these would be safe, she started to say, and then paused as she looked down the line. She turned, walking down and standing in front of a very worried-looking Desvian female with white fur coloring and an exceptionally long grayish-white tail with black spots on it. She looked similar yet distinctly different from the others. Junko. This time she was ready for the command, knowing what her boss wanted to check, and quickly scurried over to stand very close to the front of the kneeling Xeno prisoner. What are you doing? Why is she looking at me like that? The girl asked, giving Junko a panicked look. Just measuring. Nothing to worry about. Junko lied before Andromeda nodded and pointed at the Xeno. Raln and Kira stepped forward, hauling the girl to her feet. She began to gasp and panic as she was hauled out the door. Why me? What does she want? Please, I haven't done anything wrong! As the door shut behind the girl and her escort, Andromeda turned to the Xeno captain once more. Don't worry, you'll see her again shortly, unharmed. You aren't related to her or anything, are you? That sly grin on her face made Junko shiver, a motion the Xeno noticed. What? No. The captain was extremely confused now. Good. That will help keep things from being awkward later. Now then, 20 rich noble brats and 5,000 common sailors. How many of them have to die to get me the information I want? 1. 2? All of them? Should I drag your officers in here too? Let you watch as they get carved up piece by piece, organ by organ. She leveled her weapon at the passed-out Xeno she'd first spoken with. "No!" the captain gasped out once more. He looked away for a moment, and then his shoulders slumped, and he looked at the ground before very softly saying, "The Crown Prince. What about him? He's got the code? He knows what's inside? Where is he anyway? I found all his guests." Andromeda waved her gun across the rank of prisoners, making them gasp and duck. "But not him." "Ooh," she said as she finally understood. "He's in there? It's not a vault at all, then. It's a panic room of some sort." "Right." On the flagship of the Crown Prince of a massive kingdom, the most valuable thing isn't the jewelry, it's the prince. I really should have thought of that sooner." Junko stopped the demo team. Junko quickly typed out a command on her tablet to send to the team currently inspecting the safe room as it turned out to be. "Shall I start having cots brought in and aid stations set up, sir?" "Yes, that's fine." Andromeda waved a hand dismissively. "The usual sort of stuff while we wait to drop them off." Deveros looked up at that. "So you'll let them go?" "Yes, of course. I had every intention of dropping them off on a settled planet. I just wanted to see how valuable that vault was. And now that I know it's not a vault at all, well, that's even better." She holstered her sidearm and waved a hand at the prisoners. "Get them back to their cells. Unlike the sailors, these are all worth something to their families. You know, I totally forgot to offer— Junko, do you want one? Titus?" "No." Both Junko and Titus were shaking their heads at the offer. Junko was never quite sure how to take such offers in the past, so she was glad to see the commander of the lifeguard also turned Andromeda down. Andromeda shrugged. "Suit yourselves." Junko looked at her tablet as an alert popped up and switched off her translator. "Sir, they've got the Desvian nav computer working on the bridge. You told me to alert you when it was ready, sir. Then we shall head to the bridge. Make sure Captain Stahl and Captain Bloodaxe are there so I can tell them my plans. Oh, and bring— should I keep calling him Captain Deveros? I killed or stole his crew and scrapped his ship. Is he really a captain? Should I just use his first name?" Andromeda wondered aloud. This was more something Junko was prepared for. "Sir, he's still a captain in the Desvian Navy, and as such his rank is independent of the status of his ship. So long as he's a prisoner, only then he's still a captain. When he sees the light and joins your crew, he'll cease to be a captain and then obtain whatever rank you bestow upon him. If you want him to be considered a prisoner with rank, you'd probably keep calling him captain. When you're speaking with him privately, I'm sure his first name would suffice. Sir, this is why I like you, Junko. You've always got the answers I want." Andromeda grinned and reached out as if to hug Junko to her side. But as Junko closed her eyes and flinched, she stopped. "Power armor." "Right. You'd think I'd remember after 3 years. Oh well. Come along then. Bring my new toy with us." "Cookie, you too." Andromeda and her lifeguard moved to leave the room then, as the Xeno captain was shoved to get moving. "Where are we going?" he asked, and Junko answered, turning her translator back on. "To the bridge of the ship. We've unlocked your nav computer." "Captain Suvakov, call me Baroness," Andromeda interrupted. Me or him?" Junko asked. "Him," came the quick reply. Junko nodded then. "She wishes to plot a course through this sector of the galaxy, and wishes to show her captains the path she wishes to take." "And you're going to help me plot that course," Andromeda said to the Xeno, as the group walked along through the halls to the ship's tram system. It would take hours to walk the actual length of the ship, which was why the trams were important. "Me? Why would I help you?" Devoros asked. "Because this ship holds the Crown Prince. His safety depends on the safety of this ship. If we keep running into Desvian patrols, I might not feel that keeping him alive is worth it. Or if we run afoul of some other dangers in this sector, we might have to use him as a bargaining chip. Do you want that to happen?" "Cookie," Andromeda said after turning her own translator back off. "Have you had time to examine the Desvians?" "Oh yes, they're very interesting. The most human-like creatures we've encountered yet. Not just in appearance, but also in biology and anatomy." Junko listened with interest. Meeting new Xenos was always thrilling to her. She just wished that their dealings were more peaceful. "While I've yet to isolate each part of their limbic system, I'd wager— Teal, dear Cookie." Andromeda spoke over him, and the doctor and chef sighed. "Their brains look like ours. Their organs function like ours. There are a few minor differences I can see already, and I'll likely find more after testing, but they're closer to us than any we've met before. The Gobkos, Germo, Sharkin, and Grax have significant divergences, but the Desvians are very close. As in, swapping organs? Andromeda asked with interest. No, not that close, but close. Red blood, organs mostly where you'd expect them. What I find very interesting, however, is their species seems to be on the cusp of splitting into separate subspecies. It's like their class or caste system is so rigid that they've nearly started branching off different evolutionary paths. You can tell, for example, that the captain here has commoner blood in him. Not a lot, so not his parents, but maybe grandparents. As Andromeda, Cookie, and Junko all looked at Deveros, the Xenos caught their gaze and spoke up. What? What are you talking about? He says you aren't from a purely high-ranking family, and that you've got a near ancestor who was from another class. The Xeno blinked at that and shifted a bit, seeming uneasy. How could he know that? So it's true? Cookie asked, turning his translator back on. My great-grandfather, my father's father's father, hero of the Theseus Verge. His wife was supposedly a countess from one of the annihilated families, the last survivor of her line. Since their blood library had been destroyed, they couldn't claim noble status anymore, but he loved her and accepted her anyway. As a hero of such renown, no one questioned it. That's our story. She wasn't a noble. She was of common birth. She saved his life in the siege of Morelis, and they fell in love. Aw, that's sweet, Andromeda cooed out with mock sincerity before continuing in a more serious tone. But, did you say blood library? Yes. All noble families must be able to trace their lineage back to the founding. You're a baroness, do they not check? Andromeda and her lifeguard laughed at the Xeno's question, which made him glance around, obviously confused. We don't have titles like that. I just thought it sounded cool. Baroness? Baroness! She rolled the word out. I'm a filthy fucking pirate. What the fuck do I need a noble title for, really? It's nothing but vanity, honestly. You can't just declare yourself a baroness. Noble titles are passed by blood and tradition. To just call yourself one that's not how it works, the Xeno stammered. I'm fairly sure calling yourself one is exactly how you do it. If you call yourself some noble title and if you have the power to back it up, no one stops you. That's how kings get started. They say I'm a king, and my army here will kill anyone who says otherwise. Then they fuck hot women they've just declared to be nobles, and start a fucked-up incestuous tradition that leads to decay and collapse. Junko noticed how shocked the Xeno looked at the way Andromeda described monarchist systems. What are you anyway? An earl or a duke or something? No, I'm merely a lord. We're a very minor low noble family. Our only holdings come through naval service, which makes it hard to attract wives from the higher noble families. The Xeno looked a little uncomfortable speaking about it. Andromeda dropped her translator and spoke to the others. I guess tonight will be his first time with a baroness. Once more, she and her guards chuckled and laughed. But when Deveros looked to Junko for a translation, she just gulped and kept quiet. Speaking of, since this will be the first contact of a different kind, I want you there tonight to take notes, Junko. You know how focused I get when I'm riding? This time the guards laughed even harder, since that was something of an inside joke for Andromeda and her guards. Junko didn't know the origin of the joke, but she knew what kind of riding her boss meant. The guards were laughing so hard, Junko even saw Crow, the literally stone-faced Xeno, rub the back of his hand against his mouth. Why are they laughing? What did she say? Why are some of them looking at me like that? Deveros demanded. I'll explain tonight. Junko tried to say quietly, but Andromeda heard her. Yes, you might even need to draw him a diagram. Better bring a teacher outfit and a laser pointer, she exclaimed, which sent up another round of laughter as Junko flushed deeply with embarrassment. Thankfully, they were just about to reach the trams. Hopefully, the jokes would die out before they reached the bridge. She had to suffer through another minute or so of laughs and chuckles, all the while nervously adjusting her glasses, before they reached the tram, and she looked down to see an alert on her tablet. Captain Stahl and Bloodaxe are waiting for you on the bridge, sir. Excellent. You really are amazing, Junko. I don't know if I could ever let you leave my side, Andromeda said as she set her hand on Junko's shoulder without breaking it, finally remembering to restrain herself while in the power armor. Junko was afraid of such an answer, and glanced over at the Xeno captain, wondering which of them was more the prisoner than the other. No. He gave a defeated answer and sighed.